New Mexico Territory, summer of 1879. The heat hung low, heavy as grief, and the dust along the San Rafael Trail curled like smoke under a sky too wide for comfort. The mule stood still as stone, its head drooped low, sides rising with slow, shallow breaths. Beside it, on cracked ground and in the shadow of a lone juniper, a woman sat with her arms wrapped tight around herself. Her hat lay discarded, her dark hair clinging damp to her neck. Dirt streaked her skirt and the side of her face. She wept openly, shoulders trembling, and did not look up when the sound of hooves approached. Isaiah Grantham reined his gelding to a stop 10 feet away. He saw the mule first, then the woman, then the battered wagon wheel half buried in the dust. Her sobs were not the kind that asked for attention. They were quiet, broken things, like someone had peeled her open from the inside. He swung down, boots crunching over dry grass. His voice was low, careful. "You need water?" She looked up then. Her face was young, maybe mid-20s, but worn hard by sun and sorrow. Her eyes were red but sharp, watchful, as if she were trying to decide if he was danger or mercy. "I have some," she said, but her voice cracked. Her canteen, dented and dry, lay on the ground beside her. He pulled his from his saddlebag and held it out. "Yours is empty." She hesitated, then reached for it with shaking hands. She drank carefully, then let it rest in her lap. "My name's Isaiah," he said, crouching nearby but not too close. "You all right?" "No," she said. Her voice was flat now. "I am not." Isaiah waited. "My mule's dying. My wagon will snap 2 hours back. I've got no tools, no money, and no way forward." She paused, then added, "My name's Portia Zeller." The wind kicked up a little dust between them. "I came from truth or consequences," she said, eyes on the horizon. "I was trying to get to Silver City. My brother was supposed to meet me last week. He never showed." Isaiah looked at the mule again. Its sides heaved and it had not moved. "How long were you out here?" "Since yesterday morning. Got turned around in the hills. Mule gave out before noon today." "You travel alone?" A long pause. "I have no one," she said and looked down. "Not anymore." Isaiah stood. "Let me help you get that mule some shade. There's a cottonwood grove a half-mile east. Has a creek running through it." She blinked up at him like she had forgotten such places still existed. "I can lead him," Isaiah offered. "You walk with me." Portia nodded slowly. She tucked the canteen under her arm, stood with effort, and moved to the mule's side. Her hand touched its flank, and she whispered something Isaiah could not hear. They walked slow. Isaiah led the mule by its frayed rope, and Portia limped beside them, her boots worn through in places. She did not speak, but she stayed close. The grove was real, and the water shallow but cold. Isaiah helped ease the mule down near the water, then let his own horse drink. Portia knelt by the creek and splashed her face, then filled her canteen twice. "Thank you," she said, breathless. "I did not think I would. I thought I was going to die out there." "You almost did," Isaiah said, not unkind. "But you did not." She looked at him then, really looked. "Why did you stop?" Isaiah shrugged. "You were crying." Her lips twitched. "That simple." He met her gaze. "Yes." They sat under the tree, the heat breaking just enough to breathe easy. Portia drank in small sips, and Isaiah passed her some dried meat from his saddlebag. She took it without protest. "I was supposed to marry," she said after a while. 2 years ago. But he died of yellow fever in Galveston before the wedding. I stayed with my mother until she passed. Then my brother told me to come west. Said he had land. Turns out he had a gambling debt and disappeared." Isaiah nodded, watching the creek move over stone. "I was married once. She died 4 years back. Fever got her too. I went north for a while after that. Fences to mend, cattle to drive. Only just came back down." They did not speak for a time. The mule shifted. Portia went to it, knelt by its side, touched its ears. "He is old," she said softly, "but he got me this far. I do not want to leave him." "You should not," Isaiah said. "We will let him rest tonight. See how he is come morning." Portia turned. "We." Isaiah met her eyes. "You are not alone anymore." That night, they built a small fire and shared what food he had. She leaned against a tree trunk, arms around her knees, watching the flames. "I have not felt safe in a long time," she whispered. Isaiah added a stick to the fire. "You are safe now." Their eyes met across the firelight. Something passed between them, quiet, sure, unexpected. In the morning, the mule stood on its own. Wobbly but alive. Portia grinned and ran a hand down its neck. "He wants to go home," she said. "Where's home for you now?" She looked at Isaiah, then at the trail beyond the grove. "I do not know," she said. "But I know I do not want to go alone." Isaiah nodded once. "Then do not." She stepped closer. "You mean that?" He looked down at her hand resting on the mule's bridle, then back up. "I do." Portia smiled, small but real. "Then I will go wherever you go." Isaiah reached out, brushed a strand of hair behind her ear. "That sounds good to me." By the third morning, the sun rose behind thin clouds and the mule drank without trembling. Portia stood barefoot in the creek, her hems damp to the knee, sleeves rolled past her elbows. She watched the animal munch on creekside grass and rubbed her palms together, the skin still raw from rains and wheel spokes. Isaiah had gone upstream to check on a spot he remembered from a cattle drive, said there might be wild onions or yarrow there. He returned with a bundle tucked under his arm and mud on his boots. "They came up early this year," he said, laying the greens beside her. "Thought they might help you stew something decent." Portia dropped a handful of pebbles back into the water. "You think I can cook?" "I think you've been hungry long enough to figure it out." She laughed, short and surprised. "That's fair." He crouched beside her, rinsing his hands in the current. "You have a plan?" "I had one," she said, her voice quiet again. "Now I'm not sure. Silver City's still 3 days if we go slow. But if my brother's not there." She didn't finish. Isaiah nodded, running a thumb along the edge of a flat stone. "I know a family out that way. Ranchers. Good people. They owe me a favor or two. I don't want to be anyone's burden." "You wouldn't be." He didn't look at her when he said it. "Besides, you're the only person I've met who can cry in the dust and still keep a mule alive." She smiled but didn't answer. "Not right away." They packed what little they had into Isaiah's saddlebags. Portia tied her few belongings in a kerchief and fastened it to the saddle horn. The mule, steadier now, walked beside the horse without protest. They moved west, heat rising off the hills, the trail narrow and winding through dry sage and volcanic rock. On the second night, they camped near a stand of pinyon trees. Isaiah built the fire while Portia rubbed scent from crushed needles into her sleeves to keep the flies off. She kept her back to the fire a long while, watching the dark settle over the hills. "I used to sit out like this with my mother," she said. "She'd say the world got quieter on purpose at night. To let the heart speak." Isaiah stirred the coals. "What's your saying?" Portia turned. Her face was unreadable in the fire's low light. "That I'm tired of being afraid." He set the stick aside. "What are you afraid of now?" "That I'll be safe one moment and alone again the next. That I'll let myself hope and it'll go the way everything else has." Isaiah didn't speak right away. He looked at the fire, then at her. "I don't leave things I mean to keep." Portia's fingers curled into her skirt. "You mean to keep me?" He didn't blink. "Yes." She crossed the space between them slowly, as if the air might break beneath her steps. When she sat beside him, her shoulder touching his, she didn't speak. He didn't reach for her. But he didn't move away. The next day brought wind and cooler air. They reached the low mesa by mid-afternoon, where the trail widened and the land opened into soft valleys. Portia walked ahead of the mule now, her stride more certain. Isaiah rode beside her, silent but present. They passed a cluster of burned-out cabins just before dusk. Portia slowed. "Fire?" she asked. "Bandits," Isaiah said. "Nearly 5 years back. Settlers didn't return." She stepped closer to the ruins. One wall still stood, blackened beams reaching toward the sky. "Someone planted lilacs," she murmured, pointing to the wild, untamed bushes curling around the stones. Isaiah dismounted. "You want to stay here tonight?" She shook her head. "No. Too many ghosts." They moved on until the stars came out, then camped in a dry wash where the wind couldn't find them. Portia didn't speak much that night, and Isaiah didn't press her. The morning broke quiet and silver. She braided her hair with clean fingers, tied it with a strip of fabric from her hem, and said, Tell me something true. Isaiah checked the saddle cinch. You are stronger than you think. Portia tilted her head. Why do you believe that? I've seen what breaks people. You're not broken, just bent a little. She stepped close, her hand brushing his arm. Then maybe I'll stay bent in your direction. Isaiah looked down at her. That works for me. They rode on, the land unfolding before them like a promise. Neither of them spoke about what waited at the end of the trail, not the ranchers, not the town, not what they might find or not find. Instead, they let the road carry them forward, side by side, with silence that felt less like absence and more like understanding. The sun leaned low when they crested the last rise above the Mimbres Valley. The light stretched long and gold over the scrub and cottonwood clusters below. Isaiah slowed his horse, letting Portia come up beside him. Her cheeks were flushed, not from heat, but from the steady climb and the day's silence. She hadn't spoken since mid-morning when they passed a bleached steer skull half buried in sand, and she'd turned her face away. There, Isaiah said, nodding toward a low slope where smoke curled above a line of black locust trees. That's where the Vickeries run cattle. If they're still there, they'll have pasture enough for your mule. Portia shielded her eyes. You trust them. They took me in once when I had nowhere else to sleep but a fence line. They'll do right by you. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she tugged her shawl tighter at the edges where the weave had started to unravel. And after that? He kept his eyes on the land ahead. After that's whatever you want. We've gone slow, but we're nearly out of road. Her gaze lingered on the valley. I've never had the end of something come so gently. They reached the homestead by dusk. The Vickeries' place was a rough sprawl of adobe and timber, smoke rising from a chimney that leaned eastward like it had weathered more than its fair share of wind. A boy no older than 12 came running from the barn, eyes wide at the sight of strangers. Isaiah raised a hand, and the boy turned, calling out behind him. A woman stepped out of the house a moment later, apron still tied, sleeves damp to the elbows. Isaiah Grantham, she said, wiping her palms down her skirt. Well, I'll be. Come on in before the stars beat you there. He nodded toward Portia. This here's Miss Zeller. She could use a roof more than I could. The woman Anna, Isaiah called her, guided Portia inside without question, her arm resting lightly at the small of her back. Isaiah stayed outside, tending to the mule and his gelding, rubbing them down with slow, even strokes. The barn smelled of hay and old leather, and the quiet let his thoughts settle. By the time he stepped into the house, the light had gone soft with lamplight and the scent of beans and corn filled the air. Portia was seated at the edge of the hearth, her hands wrapped around a chipped mug. Her boots had been set by the door and replaced with a pair of woolen socks someone had dug from a chest. Isaiah stood in the doorway. They treating you all right? She looked up. Better than all right. Anna handed him a plate. You'll sleep in the loft. She'll take the cot in the back room. You ride out in the morning. Isaiah glanced at Portia before answering. Might stay a little while. Later, after the others had gone to bed and the fire had burned down to embers, he stepped outside. Portia was already there, seated on the porch rail, arms folded against the chill. Her hair was still damp at the ends, and the scent of lye soap hung faint in the air. I didn't know if you'd come out, she said. I always check the stars before sleep, he replied. Some habits don't quit easy. She turned to face him. I don't know what to do with someone who stays. You don't have to do anything, Portia. He sat beside her, the wood creaking under his weight. The night stretched around them, quiet but not empty. I keep waiting for the part where it goes wrong, she said. Isaiah rested his forearms on his knees. I can't promise smooth, but I can promise I'll be there when it doesn't go smooth. She studied his profile, the worn line of his jaw, the scar just under his chin half hidden in shadow. I think I believe you. Good, he said. Because I meant it. She reached out, fingers brushing the sleeve of his shirt, barely there. I never had someone keep their word before, she said. You do now. Neither of them moved to go inside. The night was too still, the moment too full. Portia leaned her head against his shoulder, and Isaiah let it rest there, easy and certain. "You think the Vicaries'll let me work a while?" she asked, voice low. "They'll be lucky to have you. I'd like to earn my keep. And stay near you. I'd like that too." The mule, bedded in the barn with a fresh blanket under its belly, let out a soft huff of air as if in agreement. The wind shifted through the mesquite, bringing with it the scent of sage and warm earth. Isaiah turned his head slightly, just enough to press his cheek to her hair. "You're not alone anymore, Portia." "I know," she whispered. "And I don't want to be." They stayed like that, porch groaning quietly under their weight as the stars wheeled overhead and the long road behind them fell away into silence. 3 days passed before Isaiah mentioned the clearing near the foothills, where the soil ran darker and the rains held longer. The Vicaries had no use for it, too many rabbits, they said, but Isaiah remembered it from years back, when he'd helped string fence for a neighbor who never returned from Fort Sumner. He brought it up while he and Portia were digging post holes beside the pasture, sweat darkening the backs of their shirts, the sun hidden behind a sky the color of old pewter. "You ever think about putting down roots?" he asked, driving the spade into the earth. Portia straightened, brushing salt from her brow. "I've thought about it more lately than I ever did before. There's a piece of land not far from here. Nobody claims it now. Might be good for a garden, maybe a goat or two." She didn't answer right off. Instead, she studied the horizon, where the hills softened into folds and the air held the faint smell of creosote. Her hands, dirt-caked and calloused, gripped the top of the shovel like she was holding something fragile. "I never had land," she said after a time. "Not even a corner of a yard. Not a window that looked out on anything but someone else's wall." Isaiah leaned on the spade. "You'd have all 4 directions and no one telling you how to face." She looked at him then, not with surprise, but with something steadier. "You mean for the both of us?" "I do." She nodded once, like a decision had already been turning in her quietly. "I'd want to see it." He took her there the next morning. They borrowed the Vicary's small cart, hitched to Isaiah's gelding, and wound through the low country where the brush grew thick and the air smelled of whetstone. The mule followed behind without urging, as if it had been waiting to see the place too. When they reached the clearing, Portia stepped down first. She walked its edges slowly, her fingers trailing over wild grasses and clusters of yellow aster. A dry creek bed split the far edge, lined with smooth stones and the bones of old cottonwoods. She stood there a long while, the wind tugging at her sleeves, and when Isaiah came up beside her, she tilted her head against his arm. "It feels quiet," she said. "It is," he said. "But not empty." A week later, they'd cleared enough to pitch a tent and mark where a small cabin might go. Isaiah carved stakes from cedar and Portia tied rawhide strips to mark where the door would face. She worked with her jaw set, sleeves rolled high, the hem of her skirt pinned back to keep from dragging. At night, they returned to the Vicary's loft, sore and wind-bitten, but with the kind of satisfaction that didn't need naming. One night, after a full day of hauling stone from the creek bed, she sat on the edge of the cot with her boots unlaced and her hands resting on her knees. The lamplight caught the curve of her cheek, and she looked down at her palms like she hardly recognized them. "I used to think I wasn't made for this kind of life," she said, "that I was too worn out or too hollowed by loss." Isaiah was seated across from her, brushing dust from his shirt cuffs. "You're not hollow." "I was," she said, "but not anymore." He crossed the room, knelt before her, and took one of her hands in his. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. After a quiet moment, she tugged gently, and he sat beside her, shoulder to shoulder, their knees touching. The oil lamp flickered, casting their shadows tall against the wall. She leaned into him, and he wrapped an arm around her waist, his hand resting just above her hip. "I want to build this life with you," she said. "Not just the house. All of it." He turned his face slightly, enough to press his lips to her temple. "Then we'll build it. Together." Outside, the wind shifted through the mesquite, rasping softly like a lullaby. The mule huffed once in its stall. Somewhere out in the dark, a mourning dove called once, then fell silent. They didn't speak again that night. They didn't need to. They built the cabin in early autumn, when the light softened and the air lost its edge. Isaiah felled the pinyon and juniper himself, shaping each beam by hand with an axe worn smooth from years of use. Portia split kindling and stacked stones for the hearth. Her fingers blistered but steady. The days passed without hurry, each one leaving behind something useful. A corner joined, a roof beam raised, a window frame cut to size. Isaiah didn't speak much while he worked. Portia noticed that about him, how he leaned into silence like it was a language all its own. She learned to listen between his words. When he hummed low under his breath while shaping the doorjamb, she knew he was content. When he stood a little longer before lighting the morning fire, she let him be, understanding that some griefs needed a few extra minutes before the day began. One evening, after the roof had gone up and the walls were sealed with mud and straw, Portia opened the cedar box she'd carried west. Inside were scraps of her mother's fabric, a tin of buttons, and a folded piece of paper yellowed with creases. She spread them on the table Isaiah had built from salvaged planks and ran her thumb along each edge. "I thought I'd bury this," she said, holding out the paper. "But maybe it belongs here." Isaiah took it gently. The ink was faded, but the handwriting was careful. A recipe for cornbread, and beneath it, a note in a woman's hand, "For when you have your own kitchen." "She wrote it before I ever left Galveston," Portia said. "She always believed I'd find a place." Isaiah folded the paper again and set it on the shelf above the hearth. She was right. The first rain came a week later. It rattled the roof and soaked the dry earth, sending the scent of sage into the cabin. Portia stood barefoot on the threshold, arms folded over her chest, watching the sky spill itself clean. Her hair had grown longer, braided down her back, and her cheeks had filled out, no longer sunken from hunger. Isaiah came up behind her, hands warm on her arms. "You want to dance? In the rain?" He nodded. "Why not?" She turned, grinning. "I don't know how. I'll teach you." They stepped into the downpour, boots forgotten, feet sinking into the softening dirt. He took her hand and pressed his palm to her waist, moving slow, guiding her in a circle under the open sky. Rain soaked their shirts and ran down their faces, and she laughed, not from surprise, but from something deeper, a joy she hadn't known she could still feel. When they came back inside, dripping and breathless, she reached for his hands and didn't let go. "I want to marry you," she said. He didn't ask if she was certain. He didn't question the timing. "I was hoping you'd say that," he replied. They wed beneath the cottonwoods, with Anna Vickery sewing lace to the edge of Portia's dress and her youngest boy gathering wildflowers for the table. Isaiah wore his cleanest shirt, collar pressed, and shaved the stubble from his jaw with a blade he hadn't used in months. The ceremony was quiet, spoken under the trees with the mule grazing nearby and the wind moving gently through the grass. Afterward, they walked hand in hand along the edge of their land, the sun stretching low behind them. No one followed. No one needed to. The cabin held warmth at night, not just from the fire, but from the way they moved around each other without hesitation. Portia unpinned her braid while Isaiah bolted the door, and when he turned, she was already beside him, her hands resting at his chest. "I never thought I'd belong anywhere again," she said. "You do now," he told her. They made their bed in the corner, beneath the window that looked out over the hills. She fell asleep in his arms, her breath steady against his skin, and he stayed awake long enough to watch the stars settle into place above the roof he'd built with his own hands. Years passed. The garden grew, and so did the house. A second room added the summer after their first harvest. Portia planted beans and squash, Isaiah kept a small herd of goats, and the mule lived out its days peacefully under the cottonwoods. The Vickerys visited often, bringing preserves and stories, and sometimes stayed through supper. Isaiah carved a cradle one winter, though they never filled it. Portia kept it near the hearth, draped with the quilt she'd stitched from her mother's scraps. They didn't speak of longing or loss, they didn't need to. The life they made was full in other ways. In the evenings, Isaiah read aloud from a weathered Bible, and Portia mended shirts by lamplight. Sometimes they danced again, slow and barefoot with only the firelight bearing witness. And when the wind rose outside, rattling the shutters, Portia would press her palm over Isaiah's heart and feel the rhythm that had carried them both through. They grew older together, weathered but not worn down. The land held their footprints, their laughter, their quiet hours. And in the stillness of the place they built by hand, love lived in every board, every nail, every step across the floor. They never left. They never needed to.